Good morning. Good morning. Hello. Ooh, hi, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Niamh Ellis, and I'm the AVP of External Communications at the Jewish Federations of North America. Seems like this is a topic that might be interesting to some people here today. It's always been true that new communication technologies have changed the way the public receives information and forms opinions, dating back to the advent of the printing press, radio, television, and the internet. In all these cases, battles have raged between interested parties trying to get one narrative out on top of another. Today, the fractured media ecosystem and a slew of media algorithms help amplify certain information to certain audiences, whether that information is fair or accurate. Since October 7th, the Jewish community has felt this acutely, and the conversation around Israel. In today's session, we're going to talk about the social and traditional media environment we find ourselves in, as well as the messaging that is able to break through to people with differing opinions. Gretchen Barton and I are going to go through some of the most recent messaging testing we've done on Israel and anti-Semitism, and we will have an amazing panel discussion moderated by Mark Rod from Jewish Insider. That panel will include Hen Mazig, Senior Fellow at Tel Aviv Institute, whose online responses you've all seen and likely shared at some point, and Aviva Klompa, CEO of Boundless and a former speechwriter for Israel's mission at the United Nations, and Bel Etra Yoeli, the Chief Advocacy Officer for the American Jewish Committee. But first, we're going to open with a presentation from Joan Donovan, who's an expert on how misinformation spreads online. Dr. Donovan is Assistant Professor of Journalism and Emerging Media Studies at Boston University College of Communications and the author of Meme Wars, The Untold Story of the Online Battles Upending Democracy in America, which he wrote as the research director of the Shorenstein Center on Media Politics and Public Policy at Harvard University. So, without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Joan Donovan.
Okay. Can you hear me with this mic? Does that sound good? All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm just going to turn this down a little bit because I'm short. I was like, what are y'all doing to me? You take that from me? Great. So I'm going to make two rather large points about where we are in the state of anti-Semitism and how it flows through the internet. I'm primarily a scholar of this new form of online radicalization where it's not the case that people are congregating in groups anymore and learning about how to hate others, but rather that they're going into chat rooms, message boards, social media, and hate finds them. Just like algorithms surface news and news finds you, conspiracy finds you online as well. And so when it comes to things like anti-Semitism, for the last more than a decade, I've been involved in trying to combat hate, harassment, and incitement through online means. And I've worked with a lot of incredible organizations over the years. So the first point that I'm going to talk to you about is going down the rabbit hole of anti-Semitism. Where is it now? So I don't have to tell you, American youth are extremely online, and they seek information about all kinds of issues, trends, news, and entertainment via social media. Google is the #1 search engine. Second most popular search engine? YouTube. Okay? So YouTube has been a vector for hate, harassment, and incitement for many years now. And I've done a lot of research about how that works, both in terms of how people are connected to one another and how they're connected to particular themes that are important to young people. So one of the things that my research has shown is that the communication strategy of particularly white nationalists, these are groups of people who are very pro-USA, they might even call themselves America First, but their major strategy is to make people laugh about racism, sexism, homophobia, or any of the phobias, LGBTQ, and anti-Semitism especially. Okay, and the way that this radicalization happens that we describe in the book Meme Wars is through these 3 different red pills that they try to get their YouTubers try to get their audiences to swallow. And of course, red pill is an allusion to the Matrix, where you can take the blue pill and live in serenity, unknowing that the machine is sucking your life from you, or you take the red pill and you see the world for what it is. The 3 red pills that white nationalists are trying to land within the American youth, first is misogynistic. Women control sex, love, marriage, the family, and as a result, men or young men are disempowered. So they might encounter anti-Semitism and all kinds of these other hateful ideologies just by searching things like how to pick up a girl. Right? Where do you go on a date, right? Because that might bring them directly into pickup artist communities where people are trying to get, a little bit of clout for consulting on dating and dating behaviors. Then the second red pill is more around people of color. This idea that people of color have easier access to stable employment and education. And once they get their audiences on board with this, explaining to young white American youth that the reason why they're not getting jobs directly out of college is somehow that even women or other people have been preferenced for those jobs, and it's ideological and there's nothing they can do about it. We see this most pronounced in the anti-DEI movements that have been coming up in the last few rounds. And then lastly, the third red pill is that Jewish people control media and government. Right? So we have enough resistance to that idea at the beginning. Like if these folks on YouTube were to come out and say this kind of blatant anti-Semitism right at the beginning of the journey of radicalization, people do bristle at that and say, wait, I know that's not real. But then by being enculturated and being down the rabbit hole, they tend to see evidence of it everywhere. And this has to do with the memes and the way in which they present, the way in which these YouTubers present the status of women, people of color, or Jewish people online. So this happens in a way that the anti-Semitism is delivered directly through the algorithm. So it's not the case that people are running into other folks at punk shows or, the skinhead movement that I grew up battling against, but rather that there's this concerted effort online to get people to start asking questions about the structure of our institutions. And algorithms do 4 things really well. They're called the 4 R's, which is, and I'll go through them all one by one: repetition, redundancy, responsiveness, and reinforcement. So the first thing that happens when you search for something like, how many people were killed in the Holocaust, you might start to see information that is repetitive. So you'll start to see figures and numbers. You might start to go further down the rabbit hole and start looking on other platforms. So maybe you start with Google or YouTube, but you don't really know, or you're searching for things like, did the Holocaust happen? Because that's what young people are questioning these days. So they see this on platforms that they're part of, but they might question that. And that's where redundancy is important, because then they start to see the same information when they move to different platforms. And a lot of this has to do with the organization of white supremacy online, which is these actors are multiple, they're multiple across all of the platforms. The next thing you see is responsiveness. So if you do ask social media or search engines a question, you're always going to get an answer. For many years studying white nationalists online, if I wanted to know something about, let's say, a keyword like white genocide, it would bring me directly to extremists, right? It would say, you want to know about this? The experts on that are on Stormfront, right? And so when it comes to anti-Semitism, there is this direct handing off point of some of the search engines to actual extremist movements. And then lastly, and most nuanced, is this notion of reinforcement, which refers to the ways that algorithms work to connect people and content so that once you've searched for a slogan or keyword, algorithms will reinforce those interests. So there's no getting out. So maybe you're young and you want to know what America First is all about. So you search for that on YouTube, and then it will keep feeding you information like that for months and months and months on end. It'll keep recommending it. And so for folks that are pulled in by people like Nick Fuentes, for instance, who I'm just going to assume you know, but chapter, I think, 7 of our book, Meme Wars, is the first actual look at the history of Nick Fuentes. We call it Joker politics, because this guy is a bit of he has sort of a Janus face of being very, the smart's not the word, but savvy about policy and government, but at the same time being incredibly nihilistic. So during January 6th, he was outside chanting, "Christ is King" and "Death to the GOP." But he's also one of the purveyors of conspiracy theories that many young youth are told to go look up. So go look up USS Liberty, find out what's there, right? And at that point, they start to get into the rabbit hole. And then by reinforcement, social media, especially YouTube, will keep adding on videos that bring them back into that world. Another word that is particularly vile that they use is the word groyper. So people who follow Nick Fuentes might be called, in some instances, the groypers, which stands for a combination of grope and goy. And so it wasn't really surprising to me when he ended up with Kanye West at Mar-a-Lago, but he is sort of the very face of what we're witnessing as this expansion of anti-Semitic beliefs directly into American youth. And I will say one thing about studying this over the years, even when the Tree of Life assault happened, there was very clear connections to a platform called Gab. So Robert Bowers, the last thing he did was post "fuck your optics" on that platform. And what that discussion was actually a discussion occurring on the online far right about, should we use violence to get our ends? And so the use of violence isn't necessarily about the violence itself. It's about getting people to pay attention to something and use those keywords to then go back online and find the manifestos or the writing or the social media of people that follow this particular ideology, specifically this ideology around the Great Replacement theory. Now, I want to close on this point about, I have a new op-ed that came out this morning in The Guardian about the rise of techno-fascism. So now that the party and the platforms are fully fused, that is to say that Trump and Musk are working together in order to use technology as a form of political oppression, it's not just happening on X. I urge people to think about the strategy that Zuckerberg has adopted at Meta, as well as a form of political suppression where they have turned off and disincentivized political discussion. And as a result, you might not have even known on Tuesday that there was an election happening if you were on Instagram, right? And they've demoted words like vote. So if you are doing political posts on Meta products, it's going nowhere. It's serving no one. But I want to remind you that Musk is deeply, deeply anti-immigrant and anti-Semitic, okay? He believes in replacement theory, and now he's tooled his communication platform to circulate hate, harassment, and incitement. It is a question of my research in terms of qualitatively, like, what does this look like? What does that mean that he returned a bunch of people that were deplatformed after the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville? He brought all those people back to his platform. He said, you know, everything for everyone in terms of speech. But there was this bright line around Kanye West and what he was saying, of course. But there is a serious problem emerging here where what we learned from X's content strategy of promoting Trump or Meta's content strategy of demoting political discussion is that the design of platforms are now inextricable from the politics of the owners. And this fusion of party and platform is profoundly dangerous and will undoubtedly affect how the public interprets global issues and how they seek to intervene. And so I see in this moment Jewish people now have, as a cornerstone group, very invested in American activism, you now have another duty in front of you, which is to help people understand techno-fascism, help them understand that whatever the machinations of state as it is enacted by Musk, Trump, and Netanyahu is going to reverberate for years and years and years into the future. So I think it's really incumbent upon the discussion that we have today to think about what does it mean to talk to young people about what it means to be Jewish, the reflections that people have on Israel as a homeland, but also as a state. Some of the distinctions here for young people are very hard to make in terms of what the state does and how much autonomy a state has versus what other countries are going to do and what kind of influence they have, right? It's a very complicated issue that requires lots and lots and lots of conversation. But I'm very worried that right now, the way that young people, the way that young people are experiencing learning about Jewish history for the first time and learning about Israel for the first time is that even in their student protests, they're being misread. And so they start to double down when you label them as, terrorists or Hamas supporters. A lot of them have no idea what you're talking about. They're there because it's an anti-war protest. And so I urge you to have a little bit of daylight between how students are interpreting what's happening and their motives, because what we need to have is a clarity of purpose around why students should care about resolving this issue, why students should care about bringing the hostages home, and at the same time try to stay away from this antagonism about the campus protests, because ultimately 2 years from now, these students will be on to the next protest, right? This isn't really about them becoming viciously anti-Semitic. This is about them learning how to be part of a global world. And so I'll leave with that, but I think it's really important that we focus on disinformation over the next few years, and that you have me as a partner in the battle. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Oh. I wish I was a little taller right now. I'm Gretchen Barton. I'm the founder of Worthy Strategy Group. My team and I look into Americans all the time and why they're so crazy. And like Joan said, we're in a crazy moment, and I'm hoping that what I share with you today can be useful. I want to give you a little context for my arrival here today, not physically, but I actually had been working on Russia's invasion of Ukraine, not on the Russian side, by the way, but I had been working on understanding how Americans thought about foreign conflict when Russia invaded Ukraine, and had been working on that around the world with NGOs. And then October 7th happened, and by that time, we had developed a pretty deep understanding of what catalyzes support of Americans for a foreign conflict or a foreign nation, and also what tamps down on it. One thing that I want to reassure you about is that as crazy as Americans are, and they are, is that they're remarkably consistent when it comes to foreign policy. And anyway, I got connected with JFNA because the Ukrainian coalition and I wanted to share it with our Israeli friends to help in this moment. So what I'm about to share with you is a reflection of about 2 years of research in 8 minutes. So pray for me. But also, I want you to know that I've assembled it into a sort of a pithy little snappy, well, hopefully snappy, deck with principles of engagement. And as researchers are wont to do, we sometimes glide over the grief and the loss and the pain and all of that. But data is my love language to you. and it's to share how you can message Israel in this moment, and it's meant to be as helpful as I possibly can help. So here we are, okay? Okay. And by the way, these images, we do work with images. We ask Americans to bring in images that represent their thoughts and feelings. So all of the images are from Americans to represent their ideas, and I'll explain them as we go along. When we started studying Americans, one of the things that we found is when it comes to getting involved in foreign conflict, Americans are understandably gun shy. When you look on Americans across both sides of the aisle, they are feeling burned and they're feeling reluctant to engage generally. Afghanistan and Iraq really burned a lot of people. And when you talk to Americans, again, both sides of the aisle, we've interviewed over 3,000 Americans on this and polled over 200,000 of them. They will say, let's figure out a way to talk. Let's figure out a way to just sit around the table and have peace, first and foremost. Is that strategically useful all the time? No. But it is a reflection of the being burned thing. A lot of Americans are struggling with cost of living at home, other issues which never seem to get addressed. For many Americans, they want to shut their eyes and go full isolationist, call it quits on the world and stay out of everything. We call that Netflix and chill, kind of. And yet, in spite of all of this, Americans have a vision of an America that they once were, strong, effective, and good. And actually, when you look at the ways that Americans make decisions, voting and otherwise, in that order, Americans want to be strong, effective, and good, and don't feel any of those things. The American instinct right now, as I mentioned, is to seek peace first, with military support as the last option. But we'll come back to strong, effective, and good in a moment. These are the principles to catalyze support. Again, pithy. I'll go through each of these. One, Americans want to engage when it makes us look strong, effective, and good. And genocide is a trigger, by the way, a trigger word. Americans like backing underdogs, not losers. There's got to be a win in sight. Knee-jerk reactions scare us. Clear eyes and motives are essential and must help, not hurt the U.S. Okay, so first of all, makes the U.S. look strong, effective, and good. What you see on this slide are images representing how America wants to be perceived. We want to be the big brother. We want to partner with allies, but we want to be the best secretly, and we want everyone to know that we're the best. But the countries that we help, we want them to be our little brother. And we want them to look up to us, and we're still the big brother. We want to be strong like a lion. We want to be a light on the city on the hill, or like Gandalf in that cool scene in Lord of the Rings where we come in on a white horse. We want to be the heroes. So as much as foreign conflict is ever about any other nation, it's really about us in the minds of Americans, and that is really messed up, and we probably should go to therapy, but that's how we think. Genocide is the ultimate trigger for Americans. If you say genocide in any instance ever, Americans immediately go that. So when you think about what happened and is happening in Israel and Gaza right now, in terms of a messaging war, the claiming of this is genocide right out the bat was a huge strategic win for them, okay? All right. Americans like backing underdogs, not losers. You'll see here some images of David and Goliath, right? One of the things that Americans are very concerned about is backing the little guy, right? Again, going back to the big brother, little brother thing, we want to make sure that when we give aid, that it's appreciated, that it's needed, and they don't want to go, well, you would have won any other way. One of the things that we have found is that anyone receiving aid from the U.S., the best way that they can talk about it is, we are winning, we are making good use of your resources, but we're still suffering, right? It's never like it's a full win, we don't need anything anymore, because then why are we helping? We're winning, but we still need help. It's a tension, but it's an important one. Okay, I hope I haven't put you off yet. There's got to be a win in sight. As you can see here, a lot of these images are reflective of a lot of history for Americans. There's this idea that there are actions which catalyze further actions. Americans are very concerned about strategy. When they think about what happens in wars and how they metastasize, we've lived through that. we think, oh gosh, are we thinking this through? Is there a win in sight? Is there a win at all? What's the win? What's the vision? When you ask Americans to talk about the vision for the future, they bring in America, they bring in headless chickens because we're running around and where are we going? There's very much a desire and a need for this is the future, this is what it looks like, this is how we're all in it together. And to that end, knee-jerk reactions scare us. I have heard in some of the messaging about Israel in the interviews that I've done, 9/11, America went to war. Of course, Israel did the same thing because 9/11. But the thing that people sometimes are missing is that Americans see what we did after 9/11 as a mistake. Americans see 9/11, the moment that Americans got together across their differences, as one of our one of our proudest moments, because we came across differences and came together. But there is deep regret and worry about getting into forever wars. And you can see here in some of the images, there's a young lady in quicksand, there's iPhone things that are tangled up, there's Vietnam, there's references to mazes and bombs and things like that. All of that references deep worries about, is there a plan to get out? Have we thought this through? What does this look like? I don't want to say we've learned our lesson. We've learned some lessons along the way, some helpful, some not. But that's informing a lot of thinking. Clear eyes and clear motives are essential. I don't know if you guys watch The Bachelor as much as I used to, but this idea of in it for the right reasons actually is very relevant here. There is a sense of are we being fully transparent? Are we being congruent? Are we doing things with integrity? And that also weighs in on calculations in terms of how foreign nations engage in and whether we back things. And in fact, corruption, the attack of corruption, is the number one most effective attack on any kind of aid effort. And that's why, by the way, and of course I'm very mired in Ukraine from that past work, but that was a very effective attack, right? Ukrainians are corrupt. They're wooded, they're buying yachts in their non-existent ocean with this money. You can lob it against any American and we'll all shiver. Corruption puts any American off, so you can see it's anti-corruption measures. Talking about that is really important. And then lastly, it must help not hurt the US. One of the things that was really interesting studying this for the past several years is that pre-October 7th, you could really make an appeal to American morality. And this idea of like, hey, be the good guys. And again, this is why strong, effective, good is dead last. Still important, but last. Americans after October 7th, in a sense of overwhelm, and the world is unstable. 87% of Americans feel the world is unstable right now. 70% believe America is unstable. They look at the world and they go, oh my God, what is even happening? I don't understand it. And they've gotten very transactional. What's in it for me? What's in it for me? Are we going to make more weapons here in Utah? Are we going to make sure that our water system isn't hacked by Iran? Are we going to make sure that our internet isn't hacked by Elon Musk, or what have you? So that's an important consideration as well. And so in a perfect world, I'll just go through this really quick. It's messaging Israel most impactfully based on our research. It makes the United States look strong, effective, and good. So supporting Israel strengthens America's global image as a force for justice and stability. Talking about Israel's commitment to democratic values, and even I'll talk about this in a minute. And human dignity affirms U.S. support, and it creates a world that values peace and security. Israelis are making good use of our aid and making progress, but that doesn't mean the fight is over, right? Sorry about the one typo on this slide. If you find it, come find me. There's got to be a win in sight. Here's what the win looks like. Zelensky recently came out and said, here's Ukraine's plan to win. I don't think it'll happen anymore, but this is something that leads to stability for the world and for the United States. Israel has thought through its engagement, and though it's complex, we have a clear path to victory. It looks like this. Israel is transparent and committed to defending its citizens while seeking peace, not just in Israel, but in the larger region. And America's national security is inextricably linked to the Middle East. Israel is a stabilizing force that that makes our nation safer by countering terrorism and helping keep extremism in check. Okay, one more thing, and I know my great friend and colleague Neve is going to speak after this. We tested a bunch of messages. I'm happy to share more later by the water cooler. One of the messages that was most impactful when talking about Israel was emphasizing that not only is Israel democracy, by the way, that is often the only thing that we say, Israel's democracy, we should like them. Not the only thing. We have to talk about LGBTQ community have full rights, women, full rights, diversity, right? It's a progressive coded. 21% of the citizens of Israel are non-Jewish Arabs with full rights. It is one of the more diverse countries in the region. This message was tested with 15,000 Americans and helped improve things on all counts. So with that, I will stop and introduce you to my brilliant friend, Neve Ellis. Thank you so much.
Wow, that was amazing. Gretchen is very, very kindly letting me piggyback off her with just a little bit of a note on some messaging work that we've done at the Jewish Federations of North America with our own incredible research and data team, our impact and growth team. Oh no, oh, there it is. Okay, good. So what we did is that we looked at some data that has come out over time, and some things that we've done ourselves. And I think this is going to seem very familiar to a lot of people in this room. When we were sort of testing how well Israel in general is perceived among different sort of political groups, we saw that the group that has sort of the most trouble with Israel is self-identified progressives. So we were trying to figure out, when we're doing the kind of standard messaging that we do when we talk about Israel and the things that we say all the time, are there messages that are more effective among progressives, and can we actually think about a certain kind of messaging for progressives that might be different than we use for everybody else? So we put a bunch of messages together, and this is going to be so brief, and we're going to have so much more on this as we continue to analyze it and as we have more time, but I just want to give you like a quick taste. So when we looked at the different kinds of messages that we use, we had a couple. These are the very, very basic categories of the messages, things like Hamas is bad, right, where you're telling them about, human shields and being discriminatory and all that. One was progressive frameworks. This was something we were kind of excited about to see if we talk about this in the framework of sort of progressive thinking in terms of power structures and supremacies and things like that, is that something that would resonate more than the way that we just sort of talk about Israel day to day? Basic fairness, Jews in Israel shouldn't be treated differently. Things that point to Israel's intent and what's operating behind the scenes. Things that point to Israel and describe it in a positive and good light. And appeals against anti-Semitism. So these were the basic categories and the groups of messages that we tested, and we tested them just a couple weeks ago. And we segmented it by political ideology, by the way people describe their own politics. So this is a quick example of some of the progressive messages that we tested. Something like, it's important for all minority groups to feel safe and included. The vast majority of Jews hold Israel as a core part of their identity. Vilifying Israel marginalizes and excludes them. Another one is Israel's creation was an act of decolonization against the British Empire. Things like, while some Americans describe Israelis and Jews in general as white, both Israel and the Jewish people are multiracial, with people of color making up 2/3 of Israelis and over half of Jewish Israelis. These kinds of messages, we wanted to see if they would appeal. So the quick outcomes before I turn it over to the panel are that nearly all of the most effective messages that worked across the board for progressives and non-progressives were actually those that were focusing on Hamas's evil nature. So these are the top messages that worked. One is about, the terrorist organization has broken every ceasefire agreement it and Israel have had in place in the past, including on October 7th when they attacked Israel, raped women, killed babies, and took 255 Israelis hostage. The second one was more of the Israel is good category. Israel has been the only refuge for Jews persecuted across the world, who were expelled from all these countries, and Israel was the only place that would take them in. The next one, a little history. In 2007, 2 years after Israel completely withdrew from Gaza, Hamas seized control in a violent coup. Since taking power, it has discriminated against women, LGBTQ plus people, and religious minorities, blocked freedom of religion and press, and jailed or murdered those who are against them. The Palestinians deserve a government that does not oppress them. So that's both Hamas's bad and a little bit of that progressive framework. So without going into all of these, you can see on the screen, the next two are also in sort of the Hamas's bad category, and one of these sort of progressive frameworks came up. And then what was interesting is that of those kinds of progressive messages, some of them really did work, and we saw that there was a big gap, that they broke through with progressive groups a lot better, and then some of them fell flat on their face. So that's something that we still have to work on, and we'll just give a couple of examples. These same two were really effective with progressives, but also really effective with the general population. But these three were really effective with progressives and more effective than with non-progressives. So every conflict is unique, and many do not fit neatly into America's experience with racism and white supremacy. When Americans incorrectly impose these frameworks onto Israelis and Palestinians, it makes finding a path forward more difficult. So that was an interesting one. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights holds that people have the right to self-determination. If you support the Palestinian right to self-determination, you shouldn't deny Jews the right to theirs. That's the basic fairness one. We're running short on time, so I won't read all of them, but I thought it was very interesting to see the way that these played out. We have more coming on this research that we're going to be putting out and sharing with our colleagues to understand why some messages work and why some don't. But I think that it's an exciting moment. So with that, I will turn it over to our panel. I'll invite Mark Rod up to the stage, and our three panelists as well, Aviva Klampus, Chen Mazig, and Bel Yoeli. And we will have Gretchen and Joan come back up at the very end so that when we do Q&A, you can ask questions of all of this. All right, thank you very much. Thank you.
All right. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you to our other panelists here. Just to get us started here, could you each go down and introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little bit about how your work is dealing with this issue of Israel's messaging?
Sure. So good morning. My name is Aviva Klampus. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Boundless. First of all, it's lovely to be in a room with so many Zionists. This feels great. Boundless is a think action tank. We're 3 years old. We're a US-based nonprofit. We do a number of things. My business partner and colleague Rachel works on education. She's in a session right now, I think, talking about that. And I focus on public opinion polling. So we try to answer a number of questions. We try to use a data-driven approach to figure out who are the most important audiences that we need to be able to speak to. Then we try to assess what do they know, what do they believe, how do they behave, where do they get their news and information, and then we begin to develop messaging that we can use in order to be able to speak to them.
That's it? No, tell them about your background. You were a speechwriter. Come on.
It's true. I used to be. This is Chen profiled in the New York Times. I hope you all see that. My background is I worked in government and public policy for a number of years. I worked in the Canadian government as a policy advisor and a speechwriter, and then I worked as the speechwriter for Israel's delegation to the United Nations.
The best one ever, I think.
That's very kind. I went from working in the most politically correct place on earth to, you've all met Israelis. And it was a real education in messaging and in communications. Is there more? Wait a second. All right, sufficient.
I'll take that. Aviva is incredible, and so is Bel, and I'm so honored to be here with all of you and joining you in this conference today. My name is Chen Mazig. I'm an Israeli writer and author. I was born and raised in Israel to a family of Iraqi and Tunisian refugees. I wrote all about it in my book, which you all are going to buy a few copies after this panel.
Right after you buy my new book.
There's
Stand
like a
Up
bundle,
Nation.
I think, on Amazon.
Yeah, that's right.
So get Stand Up Nation and The Wrong Kind of Jew on Amazon later. So I won't get into it. But I served in the IDF for 5 years. I was a humanitarian officer serving in the West Bank and Gaza, working with UNRWA, the Red Cross, all those wonderful organizations that are doing amazing work. And I've seen the corruption, I've seen all of this unfolding back in 2008. And following that, I moved to America. I lived in Seattle for a few years. I thought they would like me because they were all progressives and I was a queer Jew of color that they should accept and love. But because I wasn't willing to give up my Israeli nationality and my support for my country and my Zionist identity, they rejected me. So they're lost. I found that the Jewish community was supportive and I wanted to speak up to help the Jewish community. I moved back to Israel. I had a small social media company for a few years. I worked with tech companies, e-commerce. I was advising the president of Ghana on his social media campaign, got him elected. And then I realized that I can get people elected through social media, so we have to do something to help Jews. And we started Tel Aviv Institute about 7 years ago. It's a 501c3 American nonprofit, meaning based on donations by kind people. So it's tlvi.org. And the Tel Aviv Institute, we started working, we did data research. We found out that, as everyone said, people hate Jews online, and we have to do something to fight it, and we started working with influencers. So we do this lab called Jews Talk Justice, where we train influencers, Jewish influencers that are speaking outside of the echo chamber to speak about their Jewish identity and about Israel and about anti-Semitism in a meaningful way. We also started a community program, which is jewstalkjustice.org, which helps people, giving them tools to speak up about these complex issues. And I'm just honored to be here with both of you, and thank you. And with all of you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Bel Yoeli. I work for AJC, American Jewish Committee. For those of you who don't know, we are the global advocacy organization for the Jewish people. And if you think about the Jewish world, we work with leaders at the highest levels to impact policy related to anti-Semitism, supporting Israel's place in the world, and advancing democratic values. So think government officials, interfaith and intergroup leaders, business leaders, university administrators, cohorts like that. First, I just want to say that thanks to JFNA, to Neve, to Shira, to Eric, it takes a lot of work to put on a conference like this, and we all benefit from it. So thank you, and really honored to work with you. And second of all, applause, thank you. And it's really an honor to be on stage with these celebrities. And I have to say, I oversee AJC's communications, and it's one thing to be an organization standing up for our values and ideals. It's another thing to be an individual, putting your face and your name to everything that you say. That takes tremendous courage, and I have tremendous respect for my colleagues here. So really, thank you both. And so when it comes to messaging, obviously we're focused on educating and empowering all the leaders that I mentioned, of course, to impact policy and make sure they actually understand what's happening when it comes to anti-Semitism in Israel. And also, we work tremendously on social media to the variety of audiences that we're speaking with. So that's our part of the conversation here today.
Thank you. And I realized I didn't introduce myself. My name is Mark. I'm the senior congressional correspondent for Jewish Insider. Hope a lot of you are familiar with Jewish Insider, but if you're not, we have a 5-day-a-week newsletter, the Daily Kickoff, covering everything you need to know about Israel and anti-Semitism here in the United States, in Israel, and internationally. We've got a really great news team here in Washington, in Israel, and all over the world. So if you're not subscribed, please, jewishinsider.com, our Daily Kickoff newsletter, is a really great resource. Want to ask each of you about what you thought about the presentations we've heard so far in this panel. There have been a number of perspectives here on the effective messaging and what's effective messaging and what are the problems around effective messaging around anti-Semitism in Israel. And I'm curious what your perspectives are on what you heard so far, given the work that you've done.
I went first last time. Bel, you're up.
Happy to go first. So I think the most important takeaway, first of all, thank you for the presentations, but for me, the biggest piece of information is that context for data is really, really key. And second of all, that data is the most important thing that all of us need to be talking about. So when the individuals on this stage are posting things on social media, they're not just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. They're doing it based on what they've learned, message testing, data that they're seeing. And we all need to be doing that. So there are a lot of people in the Jewish community who are really well-intentioned and are trying to fight the war on social media and with messaging, and they're doing it incorrectly. They're doing it based on their gut, and they're doing it to make a lot of us feel good, but it's actually harmful. And every single day, we get access to data that is helping us inform our messaging as organizations and as individuals. And if someone's not using that data, they're actually harming our community unintentionally. So we need to think about that. We need to make sure that everyone in the community has access to this data, and we can talk more about how we do that. The second thing is that when we think about the election and all the hot topics, we have to keep in mind, just in terms of some of what we saw, foreign policy was not a factor in the US election, okay? People were not thinking about that when they went to the polls. So when Peter Beinart puts an article in the New York Times saying that the Democrats lost because of Gaza, it's not only completely false and harmful, it's supporting a narrative. It's taking selective data and trying to put a certain lens. And it's wrong. And we need to be very, very clear-eyed about that. So all the data we receive is important, and we have to be looking at it, but we need to put it in context and make sure that, because there's a lot that we're getting, and make sure that we're really clear-eyed in how we're applying it to what we're doing.
I agree. No, I mean, there's really nothing to add in my view. I think what Bell and Aviva is also doing, their work is based on that. All of our work is based on data research, and we're not just, as you said, saying things and seeing if it sticks. And I think that's, I mean, I've seen your research and I've seen your research, and you can't argue with results really. So yeah, and you can take my content. If you see a post that I made, if you see a purple slide with text that you love, just copy it and make it your own. You don't have to credit me. I'm doing it for Jewish people, and that's what it's about. It's about repeating it and making sure that we all are saying not the same thing, but in the way that is unique to us. So yeah.
Data gives us just a lot of information. My beloved Jewish people believe that because we're in the moral and intellectual right, that if we will just explain things one more time and maybe use different language, people will finally come around. But it hasn't worked. And the reason is that so often we're framing it in a way that makes a lot of sense to us. And we're not doing the hard work of figuring out the first rule of communication, which is who do you want to speak to? And then what do they know? What do they believe? Where do they get their information? Who has credibility in their eyes? And then framing messages appropriately. And so, for example, in the slides where you want to be able to talk to Americans about some of these issues, we know, as Bell said, 6% of Americans went to the poll based on the Israel-Hamas war. 2% of Americans believe that anti-Semitism is a significant problem in this country. The fact that even before October 7th, American Jews were the targets of more than 50% of religiously motivated hate crimes in this country, even though we're 2% of the population. That alone, from a moral and ethical perspective, should be enough to say, for Americans to say, enough is enough. But it isn't. So the reality is then we have to figure out how to talk to them about it in a way that they can understand. And what they do understand is when it's personal to them. And our research at Boundless, which is done with our amazing partners at BSG, Mitch is standing in the back of the room, he's the brains behind our operation. He's helping us to figure some of these things out. So for example, we can say to Americans about anti-Semitism that it's really not just a Jewish problem. This is what we need them to understand, that you can look back in history and see that every time that anti-Semitism is allowed to spread through a society, it is a precursor to the decay of that society. You see this in the 1930s in Europe. Of course, it devastates Jewish lives. But it's not just Jews that are affected. You see the collapse of democratic institutions. You see the rise of totalitarianism. And that is what Americans need to understand. And it should be blatantly obvious to them by the keffiyeh-clad mobs that are ransacking American buildings, burning the American flag, and vandalizing American monuments. So by personalizing it and making them understand what's at stake for them, you're more impactful in your messaging.
I just want to give one example to make it also more tachlis for all of you. We've been saying what for almost, I think, probably around 9 months. October 7th was Israel's 9/11. Turns out, we got data a couple weeks ago, that message really doesn't help for a variety of cohorts, right? So a lot of us thought that was really effective. The second we got that data, it was actually from ADL, we changed our messaging, right? Because we have to apply our messaging, what we want people to hear based on what we know works. So that's just one example for all of you. Don't say that anymore, please.
Can I give an example? Sorry, I know you're in charge here.
No, please.
Is it okay if I give an example?
Yes, please.
Bell said that sometimes messaging can be harmful, and I would like to give an example of that, actually, if I could. So in the framing that I just shared for you about how you talk to Americans and personalize it, when you don't personalize it, when you use the approach of we're the number one victims, I mean, look at the FBI hate crime. It happens to be true. And again, so we're in the moral and intellectual right. But what happens is that every minority community, literally every minority community, believes that they are the most misunderstood. And even when they see the data, they believe that they are the most victimized. So you're giving them the sense of cognitive dissonance. And then what's happening is by trying to push to them that we're the biggest victim, you catalyze this sort of victim Olympics. And then their walls go up, and then they're unwilling to listen to you, and then it becomes detrimental. And so that's an example of how messaging can go wrong, and so you really want to use a data-informed approach.
And I'll just add, if I may, that the messenger is also important. I think we need to remember we often see the representatives of the Jewish community that are from an older generation, and I think they're very wise, and I take a lot of inspiration from them. No, okay. You're in my generation. And I think younger voices are much more important, especially platforming women, platforming diverse voices. There's this belief from our side that if something makes us feel good, it must help others, and it doesn't. I mean, we've tested some of the messengers themselves, and people that I even thought, I was like, oh, they're great, but having someone speaking about Israel and Jews as indigenous with a very thick British accent doesn't connect well for people. And although it looks good for us, it's not. It doesn't. I mean, the real authentic voices matter. So I think besides the message, also the messengers are really important, and to elevate the right voices and diverse voices. And being critical of the Israeli government or being critical of Israeli policies is okay. We found that it's actually making the messengers themselves more credible. Speaking about Palestinian rights, we often take for granted or assume that people think that we don't want this war, or people think that we want a ceasefire, while we oppose those people in the streets that are very wisely saying that they want ceasefire. We know they don't mean ceasefire in the way that we do. So we need to remind them of that. And I've been on speaking to her, and someone told me in California, she said, I hate being pro-war. And I said, you're not pro-war. We did not want this war. We just need to remind the world about this. And this. And I'm also against, from the data that we found, that the dealing with words like genocide and apartheid almost makes us complicit or give legitimacy into the idea of a genocide. So I do think there's some issues we need to handle head on, and I do think that there's times that we need to explain it, but don't get caught up with it, because it's the trick of asking a Jew to show their pockets, right? Tell us that you don't commit a genocide. Prove to us that you don't commit a genocide. They know we're not committing a genocide. But it's all part of the plot to make all of us engage in this type of conversation. So just don't think of what you feel, and if you are online, if you are doing this work, and you feel like you're so caught up and so angry, go outside, touch grass, come back, and then say what you want to say.
Absolutely.
You guys have actually touched on a lot of the topics I was hoping to hit as we go through here, which is great. To be clear, I want this to be a good conversation. I want to, the more you guys are talking to each other, the better. But one of the one of the frustrations I think a lot of folks in the pro-Israel world have felt over the last year is that they're having trouble getting the message across. They're having trouble, whether it's the Israeli government itself or folks like everyone in this room trying to talk to their friends and people in their own social networks. There's a lot of issues with the folks not being receptive, with the message not getting across. And I'm curious if you guys can offer some insights on what is effective and how can you get that message out and why it has been so difficult.
That's a big question. I'm going to do the last one, which is why is it so difficult? The first of all is social media is a hellscape. And the rule on social media is if it enrages, it engages. That's the rule. So when you see if you see virality, high engagement with something, it's for one of two reasons. People really agreed with me, or they really, really disagreed with me, and I got a lot of death threats. But that's basically it. And that is not a forum in which to have a reasonable conversation about the issues. Social media is about the most terrible forum for education, and yet it is where a lot of people, if not most people, are getting an education about current events. So the first thing we need to understand is how social media is making this challenge more difficult. And every platform has got its own issues, and it rewards and penalizes in its own ways. And so one of the things we do at Boundless is to actually study what is happening on social media to try to figure out what we can do, because it is not a fair playing field, that's for sure. The second thing, and it's exactly what Chen said, is that we can do a lot of things. We can figure out, you can use polling and messaging to figure out who you want to speak to. You can figure out what they know and where you can figure out where they get information, where are their news sources, and you can then figure out the most effective messaging. But you're not there yet because you got to get it to them. And the real challenge that we have is dissemination channels. And the reason is that we don't have credibility with the communities that we want to be able to speak to. They don't want to hear even from Chen. He's just still not the right profile for them. Because when we look at other communities, let's say if we're looking at the Black community or the evangelical community, who, by the way, young evangelicals are not supportive in the way that many people think that they will. There's just an across-the-board age issue that we have to deal with. The two factors that most closely correlate with support for Israel and attitudes towards anti-Semitism are age and education. And obviously those two things go hand in hand. And so even communities that we think might be our friends, when you look at them in the younger age ranges, they don't. And so what we really need to understand is who has credibility in their communities. It might be religious leaders, it might be civic leaders, and so forth. And they're the ones that have to be delivering the messages. And the reality is you have to hold real-world relationships in order to make that happen. And in many instances, we've sort of abandoned that space and hoped that social media campaigns would fill in. But as we know, the social media gets trapped in an echo chamber. And unfortunately, the reality is we're in echo chambers online, and we're also in echo chambers offline. So we have to have those relationships outside of our own community with the communities we want to be able to speak to, and have a friendship that is solid enough and credible enough that they are willing to disseminate the messages to their own communities.
I completely agree. Just to add to, in terms of the audience that you speak to, I think the easiest thing is to speak to right-wing audience in America, conservative audience, and hoping that they will understand what we mean when we speak about terrorism. For me, personally, with my brand and what I'm doing on social media, it was very difficult to get pushback from a lot of trolls when I spoke in support of Kamala Harris during the campaign and continuing to do that. And I mean, many of my Jewish community friends were very upset with me. But the truth is that I got access to places that I wouldn't get otherwise, and I got credibility with people that I wouldn't. And I'm not American, I'm not voting in this election, but it was important for me to maintain at least one of the, I don't know, I can count us on one hand the people that Jewish voices online that have big platforms that have been Zionists and supporting of Harris. And it was important because now I have the credibility to continue calling out things that I disagree with or politicians that I disagree with. So, and I think we need to focus more on the left side of the political discourse. I think that this is where we're lacking. The right wing, I think by and large are, I mean, of course, other than what we've heard earlier, we're good in making the case for Israel. Maybe not for anti-Semitism, but for Israel, sure. But I think we need to see how we're engaging the left. And I think that it's important to not fall into this, because it's easy, this are the audience, and we get, shares and likes. It can't be easy. If it's easy, it means that we're doing something wrong. So I would just encourage of thinking of how we're reaching those communities. And that's, for us, it's been a lot about elevating voices that are different. The conversation is about Israelis and Palestinians, about peace. I'm very critical of Israeli policies when I see them, and I'm very Zionist, and I'm very much, we're talking a lot about Jewish pride, but I think what's important for our community is not just pride, is confidence, and it's reminding Jewish people that we are on the just side, we are on the right side. Even my team at the Tel Aviv Institute, they often get so gaslighted online that they're asking me questions and I'm thinking, wait, are you seriously asking me this question? But it's true, and Meta also had hate trackers that were looking at hate speech online, and they had to get therapy after because the hate speech, no, really, it's like the hate speech out there is so insane and on social media. And yeah, so I think, I would just encourage to remind the world that we are on the just side, and even when it's hard, and it was very hard for me to get pushback, and it's fine for me to get death threats from anti-Israel people, but when Jews and Zionists were online calling me names for saying what I believe in, it was difficult. So just explain the strategy, I guess, behind it.
Absolutely. I'll just add a couple of things. First of all, I think we as a community have to be very honest, and I know it's hard but nuanced. So there's a lot of finger pointing. The community's not doing enough, Israel's not doing enough on the messaging war. And the reality is there are so many factors playing into this. So this finger pointing and blame is really not helpful. And it just, the social media algorithms are one huge challenge. It's not the full picture. I think we need to have some humility and recognize that we are up against a tremendously well-coordinated, long-game campaign to delegitimize the state of Israel, and it feels like we're experiencing it now more than ever after October 7th. That's right, but it's been going on for a long time. There is a history here. There is an investment in everything that Israel and the Jewish people are facing, and we were outgunned, and we are outgunned. So we need to recognize that, and I know all of us and other organizations, we're playing catch up in some ways, and we're working to figure out, okay, how really do we fight back in the most effective way? Some of those strategies are working, some of them are not, and we need to have honest conversations about that. The second piece is when we think about what we as a community need to do to be effective in our messaging, Aviva hit it spot on. There's been this feeling after October 7th that so many of our allies didn't stand up for us, and there's question marks about, well, what do we do about that? As Jews, throwing our hands up and saying, oh, I don't know if we should be engaging with those communities in the same way anymore. We don't have that luxury. So AJC and many other organizations, I'm sure individuals in this room, are engaging in that relationship building. We need to be doubling down. These problems are not going away. In the United States, communities are growing, communities that we do not have enough connections with, and we need to have those relationships. But one piece of good news. In the United States, every single piece of polling that we've seen, every piece of data is overwhelmingly still pro-Israel, despite everything. So genocide might be a trigger word, but it's annoying people. They're not agreeing with it for the most part. And the biggest elephant in the room is young people, right? We can still fight back and win because, yes, things are pretty good for the older crowd, and we should not take advantage of that or take that for granted. But we have a long game to play with the people who are going to be in office in the next 30 years. And if we don't start changing hearts and minds, yes, the U.S. relationship toward Israel could drastically change. So we're playing catch up, but we can still catch up, and that's what we really need to be focused on.
Gonna ask one more question here before I turn it over to the audience for some Q&A. Ken, you mentioned earlier, that in your social media you do express criticisms of the Israeli government. You do, express sympathy for the Palestinians. Aviva, your background at the UN, sort of messaging for the Israeli government is a very different, position and perspective in terms of, how much you can acknowledge and support criticism of Israel. Ken, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you see that criticism fitting into an overall pro-Israel messaging perspective. And Aviva, I'm curious if you can offer your perspective on this as well, and whether that is, in your view, productive.
Sure. I mean, everything we do at the Tel Aviv Institute, all of the messaging that we bring out is based on our data search and the data and the surveys that we do with Americans. We find that criticizing specific policies or criticizing Netanyahu actually gives legitimacy to the messages that would follow, and that criticizing the Israeli government or its policies yet being Zionist and pro-Israel actually turns people to become pro-Israel. We also found that instead of speaking about Israel and Palestine, to speak about Israelis and Palestinians make people more pro-Israel. Speaking about peace for Israelis and Palestinians make people more pro-Israel. So all of this is based on the data that we found. The way to do it is, by just common sense. I mean, to be able to criticize the Israeli government the Israeli government is critical of the Israeli government. It's not. I hear it all the time. Like, criticism of Israel is always called anti-Semitism. No, it's not. The only people that feel this way are anti-Semites. We never told anyone not to criticize the Israeli government. We all are voicing our criticism, and we voice our criticism of its policies. But it doesn't mean that we think Israel should not exist. It doesn't mean that we that we don't support Zionism. And besides, I think we need to move on from the argument about Zionism. And I've heard a lot of people saying it, and I think they're right. Zionism was an idea to build Jewish state, to build Israel. Israel exists, that's it. There's no need to continue speaking about Israel's right to exist or arguing for that. And Zionism, it's the idea itself is older than the word. We need to explain it, and this is our focus, explanatory activism, which is much better. Instead of calling someone an anti-Semite, instead of saying this Congress person is an anti-Semite, to explain why they harm Jews works better. But I'm going into so many directions. But did I answer the question? Yes.
A few of them.
A few of them,
yeah. I think it's incredibly important to be honest, to be fair and balanced is actually the way that we asked it in a survey. So certainly when you're talking about this war, this distinction between Israel's wars against Hamas and it's against Hezbollah, it's not against the Palestinian people or Gazans, it's not against the Lebanese people. People really appreciate those distinctions. Netanyahu and the Israeli government they tank in polling numbers. People don't like them, and so we shouldn't pretend that it's okay. This ability to make a distinction, I totally agree with Chen, lends credibility. Also, when we're thinking about within the Jewish world and we're looking at Jewish education, we did a big study over the summer to look at the impact of October 7th and the resulting surges in anti-Semitism and what that impact was on young American Jews under the age of 40. One of the things that we found that was really interesting was that young Jews who said they had a fair and balanced Jewish education growing up were more likely to feel connected to Israel and see Israel as a critical component of their Jewish identity, more than 80% in both instances, which is huge. So we're doing ourselves a favor inside of the Jewish community when we have a nuanced education and have the ability to not present Israel as only a miracle or only evil, that we're actually clear-eyed about what it is and what it isn't. And we're doing ourselves a disservice if we try to do so differently outside of the Jewish world. I do want to address this issue of Zionism because Boundless is about to roll out a very big big study on Zionism right now. I agree with Chen when he says this debate about whether Israel has a right to exist, it's absurd. Nobody is asking if Canada has a right to exist or Germany has a right to exist. It's a de facto fact. Let's move on. But being able to message and understand what's going on in the Zionism conversation is incredibly critical. So you are getting the very first preview of very new Boundless research, and you'll soon be seeing it online and in other places. So first of all, when we ask people, do you know what Zionism means? I'm talking about the American population. We're not talking about the Jewish community. 30% of Americans say they know what Zionism is. So we are doing a lot of talking about something that people have no idea what it is. By the way, anti-Semitism, it's only about 66% of Americans that know what that is, and that's in the general population. When you look in some communities like young evangelicals, it's almost 50%. So first of all, we got to figure out with our language if people can even understand the words we're using. Mm-hmm. So even though 30% of Americans will say that they know what Zionism is, when we say, okay, define it, the truth is only 14% of Americans know what Zionism is. And in the absence of having about 85% of the population not knowing what it is that they're very susceptible to believing rhetoric, mostly that they see on social media, that says that essentially Zionism is white Jewish supremacy. And I'll tell you something else that's really impressive. When we gave people literally a one-sentence definition of Zionism, to say it's the right of the Jewish people to have a homeland to have a state in their ancestral homeland, when we tell them what Zionism is and anti-Zionism is the opposite, it quadruples the number of people who support Zionism. And it has downstream effects. It shows that they have increased favorability towards Israeli people and towards Jewish people. So this is how we use data to try to hone in on where we can have the biggest bang for our buck in messaging. It's not just figuring out in every instance what's the right thing to say, but where are we going to be able to pivot the conversation?
Mark, very briefly, I think something that they said is very important. What I think makes Chen's post so amazing is empathy. And I don't believe in us versus them, but in the battle versus us versus the pro-Palestinian community, and they're not pro-Palestinian, that's why I put them in quotes, empathy is what distinguishes us. It should not be difficult for people who are calling for a ceasefire in Gaza to talk about the hostages and how that is wrong. It's a human issue, but they don't do it. They ripped down hostage posters, right? We have to check ourselves. Demonizing the Palestinian people will not help us. Mm-hmm. In the same way that demonizing Israelis hurts the Palestinian cause, because Israelis get further into siege mentality and they feel threatened. We can't do that in the same way. So for our community and everything that we're saying and talking about the harmful messaging that we see on social media, making it that Jews are right, we're going to come after everyone. These narratives are not helpful. So it's not just the others, it's us. We have to show that empathy. We have to know that the future of Israel and of Israelis and Palestinians is intricately linked, and we can't ignore that. So I would encourage all of us, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of feelings. What we say matters. Each and every person in this room is a representative of the Jewish people and sometimes de facto the state of Israel, even though that's not true. So we all have a responsibility to make sure that we don't go too far in the other direction as well.
All right. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you, thank you. We have a couple of minutes left. We're going to do a quick Q&A, and we're going to invite Joan and Gretchen back onto the stage. So if you have a question, raise your hand. We have some roving reporters here who will bring you a microphone, and we'll go from there.
Maybe we should have spoken for longer.
Hi guys, my name is Naomi Feinstein. I'm from South Florida. So I'm a journalist, so I'm chronically online, unfortunately. And so I bet for a lot of people in the room, they love the campaign of Stop Anti-Semitism, where they expose the person, this is what they said, this is their job. But I see, unfortunately, a lot of people my age, they get very reactive and say, oh, look, you're doxing them, you got them fired, this is their livelihood, and they get like really reactive. We saw it on Columbia with the truck going around with all the students. How does that messaging, is that effective at all? Do we think those campaigns work at all? Thank you.
I mean, I agree. I think sometimes to call out people and to target them doesn't do us any favors. And okay, we'll shame them publicly, and then what? My approach has been for years to not burn bridges with people we disagree with. I mean, the amount of times I tried to speak to Linda Sarsour before she blocked me shows how much stamina I have. And it's really, I mean, if you cut someone like this out of the Jewish community, or you don't give them a way back, they'll never return. And I have so many experiences with people that we spoke to and reach out and that were engaging in anti-Semitism, and they turn around because they didn't know what anti-Semitism is. So instead of calling them out, call them in. And I know it sounds like kumbaya, but that's the most effective way. Like, that's what we have to do. And we don't have the luxury to start pushing people away and start, doxing. So I really believe in the approach of trying to build bridges rather than burning them down.
I just quickly wanted to respond to that because I was living in Boston when that was happening, and a lot of my friends work at Harvard still. And it was remarkably ineffective. And one of the things that you learn over the years of studying social movements is that students are a very particular crowd where people don't see them as adults yet. They're still seen as sort of like older children. And in a way, when you attack students if you attack students in any way, they immediately get a lot of sympathy because they really don't know what they're playing with, right? And the other part of that with the Stop Anti-Semitism is I was quoted in the Washington Post article that was critical about that. I have never in my life gotten that kind of harassment once I was quoted. Because what doxing does, and I've studied this for years, is it again puts people in the position of imagining themselves being outed for having some kind of political belief. And so again, you're activating that sympathy for the other. And as a result, it doesn't really draw people in. And it also doesn't cow the kind of attention that you think is being brought to the issue, right? It actually amplifies all of these very negative sentiments. And the last thing I'll say, just as a quick data point, one of the ways that you can ensure that a student movement is going to be successful is to engage in violence with the police. And so the other animating factor around the student protests was the use of police to clean out the encampments and whatnot. And that as well creates another very visceral and charged sympathy for these students who are not quite yet fully adults.
So I want to thank you. I'm not challenging at all what you said. I'd like to know how many of you have attended any of your city council meetings? Okay. All right. You think that the people that show up there want to sit down and do a kumbaya and let me message it right to you? I mean, I've in going to show not necessarily just support for Israel, but support for Palestinian rights and for Israel, all rights, I've been spit on. I've been called a Nazi, genocide they use. I have yet to find a way to connect with, they don't want to know. I mean, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to this and I'm going, well, this sounds great in a comfortable room to say we want to be sweet. But I know in talking to some of the youth, they're so ingrained that they know the answer. And I'm also, when it comes to Zionism, I think it's time for us to take our words back that define us and not be defined by a new message. Zionism is an important word. Is the right of Israel to exist still to be questioned? No. But if you take Zionism out of it, which was way before the establishment of the modern day Israel. So I'm just, maybe it's an age thing. I have become part of the older generation.
Can I just say something about Zionism, just to clarify, because I said earlier, I think we need to move past, but still my pin post on Instagram is explaining why you probably are a Zionist and you don't even know it, and I go into it. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
totally. I just wanted to say, in the work that we've done on anti-Semitism and messaging, which moves people away from anti-Semitic beliefs, one of the things underpinning, there's sort of 6 big factors underpinning the information environment that we're in, foreign disinfo, open systems, all contribute. One of the things that's important long-term is messaging about Israel, education, yes, all of it. But I want to be clear that it is, while it is very important, it is not saying, XYZ about Israel and here's Israel's history, does not actually take down anti-Semitic beliefs. It is an important educational thing, which the absence of it contributes to an environment in which anti-Semitism emerges. But it is not, if I say, Israel was founded for XYZ reason to an anti-Semite, it's not going to work. So I just want to make sure that we're clear on what we're doing here. It's an important educational effort. And I think, from a cultural engagement, we got here over a number of years. It's going to take a number of years and a sustained, pervasive cultural educational effort that's not going to be like one line and going to fix things. It's got to be on TV, it's got to be in movies, it's got to be in community meetings where people are kind of crazy, as you know, and beyond. So don't be discouraged, I guess, is my point.
I'm sorry, very briefly, your question and the last question touch on the same problem, which is Chen's goal, I think he's saying, is aspirational. Of course, you want to be able to talk to everyone. None of us think you can talk to everyone. Okay, there are people who are beyond the pale. And so, part of what we're figuring out as a community is what do you do, particularly when there are no consequences. There are no consequences for anti-Semitism. There are no consequences for delegitimizing Israel, which leads to anti-Semitism. So we might not agree with Stop Anti-Semitism's approach, but in terms of the good cop, bad cop element, and I'm saying this as an organization that believes in diplomacy, sometimes a professor has to get fired if they're teaching students to hate Israel. And sometimes a city council member has to get off the city council because they're spewing hate against Jews. So I don't think it's an either or. There's a time and place for different tactics, and we have to just employ them in the right time and the right place.
Please join me in giving a huge round of applause to our amazing panelists and speakers. Wonderful. I'm sorry we don't have time for even more questions. We have lunch sessions at 12 o'clock. If you want to stick around and ask questions, we have a couple of minutes, so thank you so much.